This is one by Illadice, also known as Sarah Blackwell. Hyrea and Iometa. Hyrea the healer was not a difficult goddess to serve, which was not to say the service was easy. Service to Hyrea took one into dangerous places and dangerous work. A dedicate of Hyrea went into war and plague and famine, risked death in 1,000 ways, over and over again. And yet it wasn't difficult to serve her, if you were the right kind of person. For a person who looked at the sick or wounded and starving and longed for help, or starving and longed for help, it was the easiest thing in the world. Hyrea marked her devotees in a way impossible to disguise or to mistake. It was possible to replicate the blue tattoos to an extent, though the blindfold was hard to do, eyelids being difficult. The band around the wrist was easier, but only Hyrea could make them glow with that faint spectral light. No one could look on that light and not know exactly who they were looking at. There were stories about it, about the 6 healers who had walked onto a battlefield and stood between the 2 armies, and stopped the battle cold, for neither side had dared to lift a hand against the healers. About the proud gods who drove out the humble Hyrean healers, so that only their priests could heal, and cities emptied by disease spreading from the poorest quarters, where the proud priests would not go. About the warlord, who, having struck his enemy down, saw a Hyrean healer kneel to help the man, and in fury struck the healer down as well, and died the next moment, with 12 arrows in his back, fired by his own men. About the villagers struck by plague, who saw the blue lights approaching through the mist, and opened their barricaded gates to hope. About terrible battles that lasted from dawn until dusk, and in nights full of pale blue lights moving among the fallen, and 100 or 200 or 500 men found living on the field the next morning. Temples of Hyrea rose in odd places. In busy cities, in border towns, in little villages with no apparent rhyme or reason. Only a certainty in the part of some priest or priestess that there would be need of them. They were good at predicting need. In this particular small border town, the temple was a smaller one. 2 priests and a priestess and 2 novices, enough to tend the needs of a small town and a small garrison, until the long winter came. Winter that struck early and hard, with blizzard after blizzard coming to pile snow against the walls, until it rose so high and froze so hard that an invader could walk up the slope and be halfway up the wall, 3 man heights up. When the orc raiders came, the fight was bloody and terrible, and when the fighting was over, a priest and priestess tended the wounded within, and one, the strongest, climbed over the wall to tend the wounded among the orcs who lay in the snow. He tended them all through one night, and was still working when dawn came, sewing up their wounds that should have killed, pushing spilled intestines back into place, replacing lost blood with sips of potion and infusions of magic.
"Why?"
the orcs asked.
"Why do you help us when we are your enemies?"
My goddess Hyrea is a healer, and no one who needs healing is her enemy. When he finished, he was too weary to climb over the wall again, and 3 of the orcs who had been healed by him lifted him over the wall. Then the surviving raiders left, with no more fighting. But a week later, another raiding party came, and the fight was bloody and terrible. Again, the priest climbed over the wall, and spent all of the night healing the wounded, against the protests of the garrison commander. "They will come back in another week," the commander said, disgusted. "And they will have more fighters because of you." "They will not come back," the priest said. The first raiders wore the sign of 2 crossed ram's horns. These raiders wore the sign of a flying eagle, and they did not know me. They were not the same. 2 weeks later, another raid came, and the fighting was even more bloody and terrible than the first 2 times. Again, the priest climbed over the wall and spent all night healing the wounded. "If you go again," The garrison commander had told him, "Do not come back, for I will hang you from the walls as a traitor." So when dawn came, and he was exhausted, the priest went to the commander of the third group of raiders, who wore the sign of a flint arrowhead painted on his leather armor. "You are the third raiders to come to us," he said, and he was so weary that he swayed where he stood. "The first raiders bore the sign of crossed ram's horns, and a second of a flying eagle, and now you are here. I have tended the wounded each time. I know that your warriors are thin and weak from lack of food, and if the warriors are hungry, your kinsfolk must also take to. Sorry. Your kinsfolk must also take me to your village, and I will help you." The orc commander had no love for humans, but he was a just and honorable man. He had seen the healer tending the enemies of his people with compassion and kindness, and knew his magic to be strong.
"I will take you,"
he said,
"but you cannot help us."
In that he was wrong. Hyrea was a healer not only of flesh and bone, but of land and plants, and all her priests were gardeners. The priest had brought seeds with him, hidden inside his robes, and in the orc village he taught the people a new way of gardening. He brought tubs and barrels of earth into their long houses, where they could be kept from freezing, and planted the seeds he had brought. With his magic he sped their growth, and within days the people had fresh green leaves to eat, and mushrooms and other good things. When the enchantments on the earth were strong enough, he went to the commander. "Take me to the people who wear the sign of the ram's horns," he said, "for they need me also." Under flags of truce, the priest traveled to every village in that region, enchanting earth and planting seeds that would grow quickly and nourish those who were hungry. One tribe had a cave where they grew their own mushrooms until the cold had become too great, and he laid spells of warmth so they could grow again. There a young orc came to him and said, "I wish to become your apprentice and learn this magic. Will your goddess accept one of our people?" "If you wish to become a novice, I will accept you," the priest said, seriously. "Hyrea does not distinguish between orc and man, dwarf or elf, but heals all. But understand this, to serve Hyrea, you must give up being a warrior forever. One can be a warrior, or one can be a healer, but one can never be both." The young orc was troubled, for among his people every man must become a warrior if he is to have status. For 3 days he thought, and on the third day he came to the priest again, and he brought his sister with him. "I cannot give up my warrior's place, for it is my duty to my family. But can a woman learn your magic?" "Yes," the priest said. "There are many priestesses of Hyrea. I will take her as a novice if she wishes it." Other women came, after the first, and then men as well. A man who had lost an arm or leg in battle was no longer a warrior, and lost no status in giving up his weapons. Some could not give up a warrior's thinking, and failed their novitiate. But others succeeded. The long winter was past then, but the winter gardens continued to thrive. 3 winters passed, and then the priest gathered his students. "Hyrea has told me that it is time for me to go back. You know all that I can teach you, and no longer need my help." "We thank you," said the first priestess. "You have given us much, and asked nothing in return." "I have given you nothing." The priest touched her forehead lightly, in blessing. "I have only shared knowledge, which is not lessened by sharing, and time, which passes at the same speed wherever it is spent. The knowledge I gave I still have, and the time I gave would have passed wherever I was." When he returned to the town, his red beard was long and braided, and his woolen robe was worn and patched. The commander of the garrison had long ago forgotten his threat, so the priest returned to his temple and took up his old life. For 15 years the border town was quiet, and no orc appeared at their walls again. The garrison was diminished, soldiers sent away to more dangerous posts, and the town thrived. In the 16th year, civil war racked the kingdom. There was fighting everywhere, all through the kingdom, and at last it reached the border town, in the form of a small army, more than large enough to raise that town entirely. They approached slowly, so that their fear would weaken the hearts of the people in that town, and they would surrender. They attacked in the morning, at first light, and the fighting was bloody from the first. But at noon of that day, arrows poured into the attacking army from both sides, out of the trees, long arrows from great bows too large for any human arm to draw. Stones rained on them from slings swung by mighty arms, and a wind like ice blew, though it was the middle of summer. Orc warriors wearing the signs of many tribes flowed out of the trees, and the attacking soldiers quailed, and then turned and fled, trampling their own officers in terror. And when they were driven away, the warriors stood back, and other orcs, robed in dyed leather and tattooed in glowing blue, walked out of the forest. Some went to tend their fallen foes, but 3 approached the gate.
"Bring the priest of Hyrea," they called, "for we must speak to him of debt."
There was white in the red beard now, but he still wore it long and braided, as he had when he met his students. He walked out of the gate and greeted them with the affection of an older brother. "There is no debt between us, nor ever was," he told them. "I gave away nothing and gained much."
"There is no debt between us, nor ever was,"
said his first student, robed as a high priestess now, and she smiled at him with sharp teeth. "But our goddess Iometa, who is a goddess of war, owes your goddess much. She could not help us when we fought against winter and hunger. She could do nothing when her children starved and died. But your goddess, who is a healer and does not love warriors, still sent you to save us. Now we have come to save you, for your goddess is a healer and could not protect you against an army. And when those invaders are driven out of the mountains and away from your towns, Iometa's debt will be repaid." The priest bowed. "Then I am grateful to Iometa, and any debt owed to Hyrea will be paid indeed. There is nothing I or our brothers and sisters in faith can do when soldiers come, but tend the fallen and bury the dead. We are grateful for the strong arms of Iometa's followers, who will protect those we cannot." The warriors and the healers kept their word, and pursued the invaders all the way to the base of the mountains, rescuing towns besieged and garrisons overrun, laying the dead to rest and tending the wounded. From that time, trade was opened between the orcs and humans living in the border towns, and Iometa, the goddess of war and bravery, and Hyrea, the goddess of healing and cultivation, were honored equally among both peoples. When warriors were needed to defend the people, the healers stood aside, and when fighting was done, the warriors stood aside in turn, so the healers could do their work. In time, the mountain people withdrew from the kingdom that had once ruled them, and the Alliance lands stood independent of any rulers but their own, human and orc together. All right. This has been Iometa and Hyrea by Sarah Blackwell. Hope everyone enjoyed that one.